Now we're going to do the student poster competition in a even quicker lightning round type format. Each student will have 3 minutes. I'm not taking any of your time right now with this monologue. You'll have 3 minutes. The timer will be set up at 30 seconds. You'll get the yellow warning, and then the red light will be the end of your 3 minutes. So I suggest coming on up. Anything else I need to say? Yeah. Ron, why don't you come on up and make your way up here? Olesya and Larsen, I suggest you all kind of, if you're the next one or two that are up, the on deck and in the hole type of person, come on up here so you can be ready so we can move through everywhere. This is only going to be 45 minutes for every student to present their elevator pitch. And then the students and the judges, I think the judges, you know who you are probably by now. I hope by now. Yes? Yes, okay. You all will then assemble to get your lunch first. So we want you to do that. And then you finish up and then go ahead and go back to the posters and everybody else will have lunch and then meet you back there. So without further ado, Ron, come on up.
Clock started. So increasing water demand in Florida is being driven by increases in public supply deliveries. And a big part of this is landscape irrigation, which has been shown to comprise more than half of residential water deliveries in some regions of Florida. So in studies across the US and other areas, it's been shown that soil properties improve as landscapes mature. But this phenomenon has not really been studied in Florida and in the Southeast more broadly, very much at all. And so if soil properties are improving over time, we hypothesize that maybe landscape irrigation requirements may be reduced as the landscape matures. And so we collected soil samples from the Lakewood Ranch community in Southwest Florida. We collected samples from 50 homes from the landscaping beds and the lawns. We divided those samples up in between the upper and lower 15-centimeter portions, and we evaluated soil organic matter, bulk density. We modeled available water capacity, and we then used a water balance model to determine the irrigation requirements based on the soil properties. And what we found, I'm not showing here the soil organic matter bulk density. If you want to see that, come check out my poster. But what you're seeing here is the available water capacity, which is based on a model. And we did see increases in available water capacity with increased landscape age. But when we looked at the net irrigation requirements, we did not see really a practical change in irrigation requirements with increased lot age. And so the roughly 25% increase between lawns and landscaping beds in available water capacity was not between 0 and 22-year-old lots. So beginning and end of that x-axis is not enough to really change the net irrigation requirements. But soil properties did generally improve, increase soil organic matter and decrease bulk density over time. And so thank you, and send any questions to my email, please.
Thanks, Ron. And I neglected to introduce Ron Fox. His title was Water Conservation Potential for Maturing Residential Landscapes in Southwest Florida. This is my first time, so I'm getting with the flow of things here. All right, thank you, Ron. Our next speaker is Olesya Malakhova, an ecological perspective on common lawn weeds.
Hello, everyone. I'm a botany undergraduate student, and I work in the residential landscape ecology lab with Dr. Baz Liononi. And during the fall of 2021 and 2022, we conducted residential yard surveys, and we became intimately familiar with the diversity of lawn and ornamental plants that we have in Gainesville. So this presentation is focused on some of the most common species that we found in lawns and their potential ecological benefits. of incorporating these native lawn plants while still maintaining the intended function of a lawn. So our goal is to help change social perspectives on lawn management against weeds. So first, lawns are a low-cost way to stabilize soil in new developments and are maintained for aesthetic and recreational purposes. Maintaining monocultures is resource intensive, and by allowing native plants adapted to this climate to persist in the lawn, we can reduce the amount of resources needed. We chose to discuss the following species based on their prevalence in the community, their potential ecological benefits, their tolerance of mowing, and because they add color to the landscape. These are really cool plants that are just misunderstood. And also current information encourages various methods of killing these kinds of plants instead of understanding their potential ecological benefits. This is because culturally defined weeds are undesirable plants that grow where they are not wanted, but ecologically defined weeds are naturally dispersed species that grow where their needs are met. So they are self-recruiting species. And when native grasses and forbs established in lawn landscapes, they require little to no additional resource inputs for successful growth and reproduction. By allowing these species to persist in turfgrass lawns and positively managing for these species, the turf lawn can, the turf lawn can incorporate native plants and still meet aesthetic and recreational purposes as regular turfgrass lawns, but with less intense management and resources required. And in the images on my right, your left, you can see that it isn't until you take a closer look that you can really tell a difference between the turf lawn and the lawn sporting more native diversity. And with this poster and forthcoming EDIS publication, I'd like to encourage homeowners, green industry professionals, and anyone who manages lawns to take an ecological perspective on lawn management. This means that by accepting beneficial self-recruiting species as part of the lawn landscape and learning how to identify these most common species in your area, we can determine whether management is really necessary. And we are not saying that all weeds are beneficial, because there are aggressively spreading plants that will require management. But I encourage you to come take a look at my poster and ask questions about the potential benefits of these native plants in lawns. Thank you.
All right, next up is Larsen McBride with a last-minute title change: the influence of seasons on the consistency and accuracy of tree risk assessments. All right, come on down.
Thank you. Managing the trees of our urban forests requires minimizing tree-related risk. However, studies suggest that assessor bias can have undue influence on tree risk assessments, which is the way that we identify, analyze, and evaluate tree risk. There's a need to hone these assessments to get users' risk ratings more closely aligned with actual risk. So we want to test the influence of seasons on the consistency and accuracy of tree risk assessments. In 2019, a tree inventory of over 17,000 trees in the city of Sheboygan, Wisconsin, used level 1 tree risk assessments. Those are rapid, at-a-glance tree risk assessments. We have access to that data, and we want to conduct 2 reassessments of 4,000 trees, one next week when the trees are still bare, and then another one in July after the trees have leafed out. Both times, we'll be applying these level 1 rapid at-a-glance tree risk assessments, observing trees in succession at a time on the street side from a slow-moving vehicle, and stopping to conduct more thorough risk assessments on trees that have outstanding defects or other characteristics associated with elevated risk. Additionally, we'll be conducting a census of all of the high-risk trees identified in the original assessment to see how many of them have been removed and how many of them have had their risk mitigated through pruning or other measures. We'll also be analyzing traffic data from Wisconsin DOT traffic counters, looking at quantified occupancy levels to see if those occupancy levels have any correlation with the original likelihood of impact ratings that were given in the original assessment, and seeing if that data changes the risk ratings at all. So certain defects such as dead branches, pests, cavities may be more or less visible during certain times of the year. So we therefore hypothesize that determining the influence of seasons on these general rapid risk assessments is going to help tree managers gain access to more reliable risk data. Furthermore, the level 1 criteria that are outlined in the literature are broad and don't specify the pros and cons of conducting these assessments on foot, from a vehicle, from a drone, or otherwise. We hope our data will serve as a comprehensive how-to guide for any municipal tree care professionals who want to know more about road-tested tree risk assessment techniques and whether they can help them meet their objectives. Thank you.
All right, next up is Dylan Barr, researching the efficacy of reclaimed water BMPs for nutrient load reductions in residential areas.
Hi, everyone. All right, so if you spent any time in Florida or really anywhere where lawn irrigation is common practice, you've definitely seen images like I have over there on the left. Great to see. So aside from just being a wasteful water practice, more issues can arise if that water type being used for irrigation is reclaimed water. So obviously reclaimed water is going to have nutrients included in it. And when it's applied to impervious surfaces like you see here, it's easily transferred into our surface water bodies in Florida, which are obviously plagued with algal blooms, eutrophications, and things like that. So we are studying reclaimed water overspray in the Indian River Lagoon watershed area of Florida, as you can see right there in the center, which is obviously facing algal bloom problems. So I'm helping or using drones to help me kind of quantify that overspray area, along with some other methods to quantify that volume of water that's being applied to that surface. So this is just some of my nutrient data that I have from the water samples that I've collected in that area. So the purple bars are going to be your reclaimed water. We also have a community that uses a mixture of reclaimed and canal water. And then that green bar on the far end on the right is going to be your potable water source. So there's obviously a difference in nutrient concentrations. So we're going to combine our data from our volume and our area from that overspray with these concentrations to give us a solid number of how much nutrients are being applied improperly and how easily those nutrients can be transported into our neighboring surface water bodies. Thank you.
All right, next up is Juma Bukomba, understanding nitrogen dynamics and its fate in inorganic forms in sandy soils under a cover crop system in Florida.
Well, thank you so much. Currently, all of us are seeing that there is an increasing problem of nutrient pollution across several states of the US. And mostly, we are seeing that our water resources are actually being affected. There are different reasons, actually, that different causes of these nutrients coming from different areas into our water bodies. And the EPA actually estimates that about 15,000 water bodies are actually polluted by nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus. Just like I mentioned, there are different multiple ways how these nutrients actually end their way into the water bodies. One way is through soil erosion and nutrient leaching, especially from agricultural fields. during moments, especially when we receive heavy rains, or for example, when we have increased irrigation systems. So we have these nutrients all taking their path into the water bodies. And once we have these nutrients ending into these different aquatic systems, we begin to experience the devastating environmental impacts that most of us have actually had during these sessions of this summit. For example, we see the prominent problem of algae blooms. This is accelerated or fueled by increased supply of nitrogen and phosphorus, especially in systems where these nutrients may be considered a limiting factor. We also see problems of water impairment, where water becomes unsafe for human consumption, especially drinking and swimming purposes, because the concentrations in these water sources are beyond the human recommended ranges. So the different approaches or mitigation measures that different scientists and stakeholders actually implementing to be able to mitigate this problem. And one way from the agricultural perspective is the use of cover crops. But sometimes we recommend these things and some of our farmers don't know what these cover crops actually do. And they end up like as in not understanding and not adopting some of these measures that we actually proposing. So our project that I will be explaining during the poster session looks at using cover crops to provide a better understanding of how these can actually help to give a better understanding of nitrogen dynamics through the soil profile, especially in Florida's sandy soils. We actually work with 4 different cover crops. These are, some of them are very common cover crops used here in the US. We have sunhub, it is a leguminous cover crop. And then we have sorghum Sudan grass, it is a hybrid. So we also have a mixture of sorghum Sudan grass and a sunhub, which we have as a 50-50. And then we have the other perspective of the picture to show the farmer, like if you had not adopted these cover crops, what would happen if you only leave your farmlands as a wheat fallow? And this is actually our control experiment. So in each of these different treatments, we actually take soil samples at different depths from 0 to 15, 15 to 30, and then 30 to 60 centimeters to be able to assess the viability and then the concentration of nitrogen across these different soil depths. And we believe that creating this information and providing it out there to the farmers will help them to have a better perspective of how nitrogen actually moves through the soil profile to be able to make better nutrient management practices and mitigate some of the environmental impact that I actually began mentioning earlier on. I welcome you to my poster to be able to get more information about our research. I'm a student of Dr. Mary Last. Thank you.
Okay, next up, Teagan Young. Cutting propagation of 4 Florida native taxa of wild coffee. I'll let you say the botanical name. For ornamental use. Come on up.
Have you been looking for a native shrub for your landscape that has evergreen foliage, fragrant white flowers, beautiful red drupes, is tolerant of full sun to part shade, and attracts pollinators and wildlife? There are 3 species of wild coffee, Psychotria tenuifolia, Psychotria nervosa, and Psychotria ligustrifolia, and 1 cultivar, Little Psycho, that fit all of this criteria. Here on the top, we see an example of all 4 of those taxa. Starting on the left is Psychotria ligustrifolia, or Bahama wild coffee, that has a shorter structure compared to the other 2 species. Next, we have Psychotria nervosa, or the regular wild coffee with its deep veined leaves. Third, we have Little Psycho, which is a cultivar of Psychotria nervosa, and it has a dwarf habit. And last, we have Psychotria tenuifolia, which is called softleaf wild coffee with a blue-green foliage. Unfortunately, you may have a difficult time finding these taxa at your local nursery. Actually, native plants only represent about 16% of our ornamental industry here in Florida. So to augment that, we are looking at a study that uses stem cutting propagation compared to seed propagation, specifically because these plants have a physiological dormancy that causes seed germinations to be low and sporadic, and it ranges year to year. So Semi-hardwood cuttings for this research were taken in the fall, and each taxa was treated with one of 3 talc auxin concentrations, and then they were placed into a mist house for 8 weeks. We found that across all taxa and all auxin concentrations that 71 to 88% rooting was achieved, and the root quality actually improved with the application of auxin. So if you can look in the bottom right photo, a healthy root system can be established within a short period and at an acceptable rate for commercial production. And based on these results, we're hoping to see that wild coffee used more in native landscaping and gardens. And for more information on my methodology and results, come see my poster. I would love to answer any questions for you guys.
Okay, the final presenter in the masters category is Kacey Russo. How many plants are in your yard? I don't really know. Differences in how people perceive and manage lawn and non-lawn plant species affect patterns of urban plant diversity. Come on down, Kacey. And Jesse will be next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kacey Russo. I'm an undergraduate research technician in the Residential Landscape Ecology Lab with Dr. Basil Iannone. And we've been working on a really interdisciplinary study of residential yards here in Gainesville. So, and this study is currently in review for the journal Landscape Ecology. But we've been working on the study, and we asked homeowners how many plants are in your yard. And we also went to the 30 yards in the 4 neighborhoods in Gainesville and reported the actual plant species richness. So when if I asked you this question, how many plants are in your yard, what would you think? Maybe 10 species, 50 species, 100 species? When I asked this question, are you thinking of the shrubs, the landscaping plants, the trees? When I asked this question, are you thinking of the species in your lawn? So we hypothesized that the species that that homeowners perceived in their yards were more strongly correlated to non-lawn plants than lawn plants. And we define lawn plants as the turf grass and any other small self-recruiting species, and non-lawn plants is pretty much everything else, your shrubs and your landscaping plants. Additionally, there's a longstanding understanding in ecology that as spatial scale increases, species richness usually also increases. However, we hypothesized that due to differences in the way that lawn and non-lawn plants are perceived and managed, that they would have divergent diversity patterns. So for our results, we did find that the perception of homeowners was more strongly correlated to non-lawn plants than lawn plants. And we also did find divergence in species richness for both alpha diversity and beta diversity, which I can explain more in the poster session. But we found 406 non-lawn species and 132 lawn species in only 30 yards in Gainesville. So that's quite a bit of plant species for that few yards. So we need to consider what are the ecological implications of this overlooked diversity, especially in lawns, and what are the ecological implications of losing this diversity if we decide to maintain lawns that have fewer species. And so maybe programs that are trying to increase ecological value of urban areas can focus on increasing awareness and acceptance of those species that already exist. Thank you.
Okay, next up. Next up is Jesse Jones. Are we landscaping in our best interest? Disconnect between yard management strategies and prioritized ecosystem services.
Is it the black button with those slides? Okay, all right, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse. I'm a PhD student here at the School of Natural Resources and Environment, and I'm based in the Residential Landscape Ecology Lab of Dr. Basil Iannone as well. So currently, urbanization is the only land use trend increasing worldwide, and within the US, residential landscapes are increasing at the fastest rate. These ecosystems are dominated by turf and low structural complexity, leading to increasingly homogeneous landscapes across geographic space. Considering the costs associated to both people and the environment of these systems, I think, and how we develop and manage them. I think we'd all like to understand what people actually desire and if those desires are being met by current strategies. Oh, that was my slide. Okay. So this is the core question of my research, and it's revolves around what people are, whether they're actually getting what they want from their landscapes. And we use the framework over here to kind of illustrate how we're thinking about and approaching this research. The maintenance represents the human moderated element of inputs and labor, which we're quantifying through social surveys. Landscaping is the physical interface of these systems, where we're measuring plant community composition and vegetative structural complexity. And then ecosystem services allow us to measure the benefits of these systems. And we're doing that through all of these things through social surveys, getting at the maintenance, field surveys, getting at landscaping, soil, herbivory, and structure through LiDAR. And the ecosystem services are coming from assessing that data as well as the social survey data. And the pictures down here kind of just conjure up some images of ecosystem services and residential landscapes. And so to the analyses, we had homeowners rank their priorities in making landscaping decisions. And some of those things are probably not surprising, seeing things like aesthetics at top and comfortable environment up there as well. But wildlife habitat being ranked really high was a bit interesting. And then property value being ranked last was also surprising to us. Over here, the plots just show a few of the ecosystem services we've looked at in response to a maintenance intensity gradient. And those are just typical of the trends we're seeing across all the services we're looking at so far, which is that there is either negative or no relationship as this management intensity gradient is increasing. So in conclusion, we're finding that there is really management strategies are not in agreement with the services people are prioritizing, and that this disconnect implies there are marketing and educational opportunities that can be taken advantage of. Overall, we just hope these findings can influence the development of predictive models, which will be useful to industry policymakers and other interested parties in developing more social and ecologically beneficial landscapes in the face of urbanization trends today. Thanks.
Okay, next up, Cody Gusto. Exploring factors influencing residents' adoption of pollinator-friendly gardening practices.
Thank you. So before I dig in, I just want to note that this study was conducted as part of a broader research grant, a multi-component research grant. So in addition to acknowledging my research team, Colby Silvert, Dr. Laura Warner, and Dr. John Diaz, I want to acknowledge Dr. Rachel Mallinger, who is the PI of that at-large project, and Dr. Gary Knox, who is the co-PI, and the rest of the research team associated with that at-large project. Just a little bit of significance and background. This study began with a review of literature, and the starting point is, pretty established phenomenon that I'm sure most, or if not all of you, are very well aware of or familiar with, which is that the process of urbanization and the associated increase in developed landscapes, frequently adversely impacts the volume, the availability, and the quality of floral resources, which in turn affects the health, the diversity and richness of native and non-native bees and other pollinators. So that's kind of our starting point. But we did find this emerging growing evidence to suggest that actually pollinator health can be more robust in urban areas than in, quote unquote, rural or natural spaces, which is promising. So that kind of led us to target residential homeowners and to try to better understand their attitudes, their perceptions, their needs to encourage beneficial pollinator gardening practices to maximize impact, and that being impact being to improve pollinator health overall.
So therefore, the purpose of this study was to identify the most salient barriers and associated strategies and solutions related to pollinator gardening implementation. We also captured sort of baseline reactions and perceptions of residential homeowners in Florida, but the barriers and the strategies were the sort of key focal points. So this was a qualitative study, sort of an elicitation phase of a study, and we're going to do we're currently in the process of conducting a subsequent survey phase of that study. But we targeted homeowners in 3 different regions in Florida. We initially assembled 24 participants to participate in 3 focus group sessions. We had some folks drop off, so we ended up with a total of 20 participants. In our recruitment process, we developed this screening tool to try to segment gardeners by interest and experience, because we really didn't want to skew data collection towards master gardeners or folks that were already predisposed and interested in this topic already. We analyzed our results using thematic analysis, triangulated between the review team, and we found some really, really interesting things. Again, we found some really interesting things related to perceptions of terminology. How do you even define a pollinator, first and foremost? But really, again, the focal point was barriers and strategies. We found some really, really fascinating ones. Limited knowledge and information access, which is maybe intuitive to a lot of us here. That's an example of a barrier that we found. And then developing neighborhood buy-in and support using some innovative methods like signage and HOAs and things like that was an example of a really, really promising strategy and solution that folks came up with. And there's a lot more. Obviously, that's just a sample, so I'd love to talk with y'all more about it at my poster. That's it.
All right, next up is Carolyn Nickerson. Attitudes and preferences of consumers and growers toward a proposed scientifically based UF trademark process for wildlife friendly plants. Does that sound different when I say it?
Thank you so much. Yeah, you can't really fit that on a bumper sticker. Sorry, everyone. First and foremost, a huge thank you to everyone who supported me in this and for letting me be part of this project. The work I did is only a small piece of a larger project related to the very catchy scientifically based UF trademark process for wildlife friendly plants. It's basically a certification that would validate if a plant sold by a particular grower is indeed wildlife friendly. And I was part of the social science portion of this project. So we want to understand for consumers and for growers, what's the best way to roll this potential certification out? So there were 2 surveys conducted, one targeted toward consumers, one targeted toward growers. Some top line findings from the consumer survey, we found that people are nuts about wildlife friendly plants, especially in Florida. Cost doesn't really seem to be an issue. People are willing to pay more for them because for the purposes of this study, wildlife friendly can be interpreted as pollinator friendly. However, one interesting finding we had in this survey is the audience didn't really understand the need for a certification. They thought they were already buying wildlife friendly plants and they already had wildlife friendly plants in their landscape. So we found that UF IFAS Extension was a respected information source for this audience, and they might be an ideal educational partner in terms of explaining the need for this certification, because not all wildlife friendly plants that are marketed as such may actually be wildlife friendly. For the growers, we found widely that this audience views themselves as innovators, and they see the value of wildlife friendly plants, and they want to include them in their efforts. Cost was seen as a potential barrier. However, broadly, the grower audience was enthusiastic about the certification and it would likely succeed. The diffusion of innovations theory was embedded throughout both of these surveys. It's a widely respected social science theory about how diffusions roll out in a social system. For the consumer survey, we did some data analysis and we found that one particular aspect of the diffusion of innovations had a strong relationship with awareness of wildlife friendly plants and perceived knowledge about it. So basically what we found is that the easier the certification is for this audience to understand, the more aware that they feel about wildlife friendly plants, and the more they think they understand them, the more enthusiastic they are. So in terms of making recommendations about rolling the certification out and potential marketing materials and outreach, complexity, making sure that it is easy to understand the certification is key. And another finding we found is clear labels for the certification in store, just any time a consumer encounters it, are helpful. And then for the grower survey, we found that all the different characteristics were significantly related to likeliness to adopt this certification. So our recommendation was when you're doing demos, when you're doing trials, reference any of the diffusion of innovation characteristics. Thank you so much.
Next up is Colby Silvert. When local rainfall is enough, a research intervention to improve residential landscape water conservation.
Okay, thank you. First, I just want to point out that this was a very collaborative effort, as you can see from all of the logos here. So first, my research team, Dr. Warner, Dr. Diaz, and Dr. Gusto. So thank you to them. But then also we worked with the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and Robin Grantham was the project manager. And also I think Dr. Nick Taylor is here, and he's been assisting with this project as well. And you can also see the Hunters Green Community Association. That's a large homeowners association in the Tampa area that partnered with us on this. And that's important because we know in homeowners associations, residents may tend to overwater. So this is an important group to target for water conservation. So you got a little bit of a background earlier in the presentation, if you were here, about why this is an important issue and what this intervention is. But we're looking at the disconnect between people's understanding of rainfall and how much rainfall is received and how they're watering their lawns. So they may, what we're seeing and what research tells us is that people aren't basing their irrigation practices and their watering of their turf grass on the amount of rainfall that's received. So we want to look at how we can address this. And this is where this study comes in. It's an opportunity to look at educational efforts and increasing awareness of that rainfall and how that connects to how you should water your lawn and not overwater your lawn. So this intervention, to zoom into what you saw a preview of earlier, is around this sign is the main intervention. And that's at the front of this HOA where a lot of residents are going to drive past this. And this is a solar powered with a backup battery, but we're updating this remotely with the amount of rainfall per week. And the sign also shows how much water is appropriate for your lawn for most lawns during that season. So people can kind of calculate, are we above, below, or should I be watering my lawn? So with that intervention, we also did a baseline study. So we looked at perceptions, knowledge, behaviors before the sign was installed. The sign will be there for a year. And then we're going to look at this after. So and then in addition to that, what Dr. Taylor is helping with is analyzing utility data. So how does actual water consumption change during this period? And what I'll be sharing at my poster, and I hope you'll come over and talk to me about it, is what we've learned so far. And what we see is that people see advantages, they see benefits to adjusting their irrigation based on rainfall. A lot of residents are saying that they're doing this already, but when we assessed on the know-how, the knowledge, how do you monitor this? Where do you get sound, accurate information? That was lacking, and a lot of people didn't know how to do that. So we're seeing that people perceive that they may be doing this, they see benefits, but we see an opportunity for us through this sign to inform them of actual data to do that accurately. So hope to talk to you more at my poster.
All right, next up is Agustin Boeri. Alternative Urban Landscapes, a look into public perspectives and ecosystems trade-off.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Today I'm going to talk about one of my dissertation projects. Before that, I want to thank you, CLU and FNCLA and all the Turfgrass, the UF Turfgrass team for supporting this project. So I'm going to know. For my slides are not there, but we know that ecosystem services provide many benefits to human well-being. And we know that mixing different plants belonging to different functional groups has the potential to increase these ecosystem services. So we designed a project to evaluate all these ecosystem services and also evaluate the public perception, the management requirements, and the persistence of these alternative landscapes. So in last year, we developed an experiment at the West Florida Research and Education Center. And what we did was to remove some turfgrass plots. They were a typical long grass with a mixture of centipede grass and Sanauxin grass. And we went there with a subcutter, we removed all the grass, and we established 3 different landscape alternatives. One was a mixture of like a native forest mixture with coreopsis, sunshine mimosa, frog fruit, and centipede grass. The other was a legume grass mixture with a mixture of Bahia grass and ecoturf perennial peanut. And the last one was a non-living ground cover with a mixture of, not a mixture with wood chips as a non-living ground cover. And we also left some turfgrass plots as an undisturbed turfgrass control. So what we did, the first thing that we did was to measure the public perception. And to do that, we distribute a survey among our turfgrass field day attendees and all the master gardener volunteers that visit our research center. And then we measure different ecosystem services. We measure stuff like weed cover, carbon sequestration, nutrient leaching, pollinators, crawling insects, and many others. So with that, I invite you to visit my poster. I have all the results there, and I'm sorry that my presentation is not there.
I want to give Agustin credit that mistake is on us. So judges, take that into consideration. Agustin, great job and rolling with it. That's a typical extension call. Okay, next up is Alicia Papanek. Extension perspectives on urban agriculture in Florida. Come on up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Papanek, and the research I'm presenting today is about extension perspectives on urban agriculture in Florida. Now this is relevant, this slide. This research was conducted as a part of Dr. Catherine Campbell's Community Food Systems Research Lab and supported by phase 1 of UF IFAS's CEDIT program, or the Support for Emerging Enterprise Development Integration Teams. You may be wondering what I mean when I say urban agriculture, and you wouldn't be alone in wondering this, as this term is used broadly across literature and fields, and it often differs depending on who uses it or where it's used. For our purposes, it refers to food producing farms, gardens, and distribution systems like CSAs and farmers markets, non-commercial farms and gardens like community gardens and school gardens, commercial or market farms and gardens that are selling the foods or products that they produce, beekeeping, poultry, aquaculture, animal keeping, and then innovative methods like hydroponics and aquaponics. UA is also, or urban agriculture is also sometimes referred to as local food production. And all of these activities are evolving and growing in the state of Florida. As we all know, Florida is steadily urbanizing, and while Extension has historically served rural agriculture, this increasing urbanization offers an exciting window of opportunity to translate Extension's agriculture and resource management expertise into the urban environment. Urban agriculture offers opportunities to enhance the physical environment, to green urban landscapes, increase access to fresh foods, provide environmental and nature-based learning, and may offer sustainable use of urban resources. Extension agents across Florida are increasingly using or providing urban agriculture-based programming and services. We surveyed, as part of our research, those extension agents to learn the scope of the programming that they're providing, the barriers that they face, and the opportunities that they see for extension and for urban agriculture as a whole. Our research found that extension agents face a number of barriers that keep them from being able to effectively serve urban growers in their areas, as you can see on this slide. However, we also found that agents see a wide range of opportunities to expand programs to new audiences, to build education capacity through teaching, gardens and farms to urban farmers, but also to the public and to local governments. And then to assist in the formation of strategic partnerships that can support these emerging audiences. Research in this domain has shown that producing foods in urban areas has a wide range of benefits for urban populations. However, limitations exist to the impact that urban agriculture can have. Extension is in a unique position with unique expertise to address these limitations and to make a difference in urban livelihoods. And I would love to talk to you all more about this at my poster.
Emily, do you want to make the slide adjustments now? Let's just do it right now. Let's make sure, we're gonna make sure we have all the slides.
We're using yesterday's version.
Thank you, Emily. Just a couple more, and then it'll be lunchtime, and poster viewing time. All right, so next up is Emily Taylor with alterations of dissolved organic material composition and its influence on ecosystem respiration. Come on up.
Hello, everyone. We'll have to pretend there's ecosystem respiration there because I underestimated how long it will take to model metabolism. But we are going to talk a lot about DOM. And so dissolved organic matter is an important regulator in energy and nutrient cycles in aquatic ecosystems, all ecosystems, but we're thinking about water today. However, the molecular or chemical composition really mediates the interactions with those different processes and dynamics. And that composition is dictated by the source material and the decomposition processes that got the DOM from like the tree in your landscape to the stained water that you have in front of you. And one thing we know is that urbanization changes the landscape. Thus, it's changing the DOM as well. And how is that DOM changing as urbanization intensifies? And so we looked at 7 sites throughout Gainesville, Florida at an increasing urbanization level, and you can very poorly see the watersheds on my map in the lower corner, but you can see the impervious surface cover through the heat map. And we studied DOM composition for about 2.5 years using fluorescence spectroscopy, looking at excitation emission matrices. And through that, we were able to come up with a parafact model, although I skipped a little bit over the objectives. And so our objectives really were, how does this increasing urbanization affect DOM? And then how is that change? Is the phenology or the seasonal annual patterns in DOM changing? Because that's really important for these energy and nutrient cyclings if we're having loadings at different times of these like peak ecosystem functions. Anyways, And so what we found was that the 4 components through the pair of fact model best explained the DOM data that we're having. And 2 of these components are pretty ubiquitous. You find them everywhere. Component 1 and 2, humic and fulvic-like DOM material, but these other 2, C2 and C3, are more microbial or protein-like, indicating that they're more labile or recent source. And pretty clearly you can see that across an increasing urbanization gradient, so like least urbanized to most urbanized, we're having more proteinaceous bioavailable type DOM and less humic-like terrestrial derived DOM. And using those EAMS data, we were able to glean a bit more information as well, using different indices developed for interpreting DOM. And we found that wastewater effluent signatures also increase with increasing urbanization. And that is with the Barr figure with the peak T to C ratio, looking at like protein versus humic like DOM. And that when you compare these different components and indices to impervious surface cover, which is the box plots, and then moving impervious surface cover on the x-axis, pretty uniformly increasing watershed impervious surface cover resulted in a shift from more complex DOM to more labile DOM. Oh shoot, am I out of time? I wasn't even looking. Okay, find out more at my poster. I'm right in the back.
Okay. Next up is Audrey Goeckner. Thank you. Water column saturation profiles of N2, CO2, and CH4, also known as nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane, in natural ponds versus stormwater ponds in Florida.
So there are thousands of stormwater ponds in the state of Florida, and we're just now starting to recognize that they play a large role in greenhouse gases. This study sought to understand more about the drivers of greenhouse gases in urban ponds and how they compare to naturally occurring ponds in the state. To do this, we sampled water columns of urban and natural ponds, and in natural ponds, we had 2 groups: humic water ponds, which are very dark water ponds, and clear water. So at these sites, we sampled from 3 layers of the water column, depending on water column stratification using thermal profiles. So in this figure here, each blue dot is the surface, middle, and then bottom. At each site, the samples, or each of the samples were analyzed for greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and methane, and various water chemistry parameters. So these are preliminary regressions showing some of the distinct differences between urban and natural ponds. First, urban ponds had a much higher pH than natural sites, and we think that this might be because of urban infrastructure weathering that contributes basic ions to the water, increasing the pH. And that high pH can convert CO2 into a form that cannot be emitted to the atmosphere. So this could be like an unexpected benefit of urban infrastructure weathering. The quality of dissolved organic carbon differed between urban and natural, and they had contrasting effects on CO2 saturation in the water column. So urban DOC was likely algal derived, and with increasing algal productivity and photosynthesis, that contributes to CO2 drawdown. Whereas in natural sites, the DOC is likely terrestrially derived. And if you consider clear and humic sites as 2 end members of a dissolved organic carbon spectrum, then increasing water color or increasing dissolved organic carbon can favor respiration. And one of the reasons is likely due to that colored water preventing light penetration into the water column. And finally, with morphology or the shape and characteristics of the pond, in urban ponds, deeper water columns could hold more methane at the bottom of the water column, but in the deeper sites, there was also less in the surface of the water column. And so this and other studies kind of point to deeper water columns can help, can enhance the number of opportunities for methane oxidation when it travels upward before it's emitted to the atmosphere. And so this could maybe be implemented in future pond designs. Thank you.
And so for a replay, we're going to give Agustin another go at this with his prepared materials. I think that's fair. So pretend you didn't hear anything from him.
It's okay, I have 3 extra minutes. So I want to expand a little bit while explaining. Here on this picture, you can see a pumping station that we use it to extract water samples from the experiment that I showed before. So there. So like I mentioned before, we tried to simulate a turf grass rebate program. So what we did there, we went with the salt harvested and removed the turf grass lawn from there. And then we went and, for example, for the native plants, we went with the drill agar and we planted 50% of the surface with 1 gallon pots. And for the legume and grass mixture, we put Bahia grass sod in replacement of the existing turf. And then we also went with a drill agar and we planted the peanuts. That eco-turf variety that I mentioned is a rhizomatous peanut. It's perennial and it's more like an ornamental type because there is different types of peanuts. And I have another experiment trying different mixtures. We have a soloniferous one and seed ones. And also peanuts that are coming from different regions, like Georgia or Florida for South Florida. So all these plots are, there is a drainage lysimeter vary on all these plots. There are about 15 liters. And so the first picture that I show, that's what we use to quantify all the groundwater impact of this practice. And for the public perception, what we did is measure which of the ecosystem services people consider were more important. We asked if they will implement these landscapes in their own yard or if they will recommend these to a customer. And we also asked them how well they look. I also quantified the aesthetics myself. I did a quality rating. I did percent cover, green percent cover, and species compositions. And I also measure pollinator counts, weed pressure by weed counts, and surface temperature. So I'm sorry for the problem earlier, and I hope you see you in my post. Thank you.
Okay, Kacey is going to come back up. She had a graphic. We're going to show it. Come on up, Kacey. It was in here for all of them. Minute. 1 minute. Okay, 1 more minute.
So I apologize that I didn't show this visual, but I just wanted to show examples of what I mean when I talk about lawn and non-lawn plants. So we tried to sample a variety of landscaping styles, as you can see. So in this example of this little picture of a lawn, there's at least 9 species, just to put into perspective how many species there can be in lawns that are often overlooked. And for the results, that just shows our divergence in alpha and beta diversity, as well as perceived species richness being having a positive relationship to non-lawn plants rather than lawn plants. And yeah, I can discuss this further at the poster session if you would like. Thank you.